Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. And tonight, we have a spooky ceremony, a spooky ritual, if you will. I am your host, Dawn.
And we are the Falgout siblings.
Oh my
I am
god.
your other host, Steven. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where we recommend something to each other and then we discuss it in the following week. But this time it's a spooky.
Yes. And as you can tell by our voices, we have left the mortal
Oh, what is that?
dimension.
I think that's the howling wind. I'm the howling wind. Oh my gosh, it's speaking to me.
Wow.
I'm just wind. I'm not really that spooky. It's so spooky.
Yes, and I'm beginning to feel a bit of a chill in my room as well. But my wind filter for my microphone is a little bit too strong, so you can't hear it.
I'm surrounded by candy where I am, the spookiest treat of all.
You know, I gotta be honest. I think we've lost it a little bit.
Well, I feel like there are only so many things that could help us. So, do you have any helpful spook friends for us today?
Well, I'm not sure. You know, I invited them. I said, "Hey guys, you know, we're doing the thing," and I don't know where they're nowhere to be found. So I don't know. Like, I feel like I kind of got ghosted.
I think what we'll have to do, Dawn, is I think we'll have to, at the same time, do the ritual. Are you ready?
Oh!
The ritual that we both know.
I wasn't clued into this.
Here we go.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Well, come.
friends, we gather here
We gather.
and we invite you to join us.
Oh,
Did it work?
I just don't think they got the memo. I don't think they knew. I think, you know, it kind of sucks. Friends, everyone watching, I'm sorry. I think the spooks are up for tonight. And I think we have to move on to
We forgot to send them the blood-packed email.
shit.
The email written in blood.
You know what? That was my responsibility. I didn't get the sacrifices. I'm sorry. Okay, I let us down, but it's fine. It's fine because you know what? It's not Halloween night today anyway. You know, if you are listening on Halloween night, in that case, it is Halloween night, but it's not right now. So I'm sure that, you know, they just, I don't know. I'm sad. We're all disappointed, but it's all right because we're gonna move on to what I recommended to you, Steven, last time. If that's okay.
Yes, let's do it.
All right, so last time I recommended to Steven. Oh my god! It's Ashley and Zoe! Wait, no way. Lindsay! What? Billy! They're showing up! Gary? Malorice? Malorice is so hidden. Oh shit, there he is. And I'm so happy they're all showing up because I have some new friends to show you. So our first new friend, on top of Steven's head, our swordsman, Lance. Lance is a skilled swordsman. He is here to ravish all mortal souls, particularly anybody who approaches Steven. Not me so much, because I am defended by the lovely Mr. P. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what this guy's deal is. I don't know what he's trying to advertise. It's a little bit bizarre. You know, he's kind of like the guy you invite you don't really know too well, and then he shows up and he's a little weird, and you're like, So I'm just not going to comment too much on that guy. But
I didn't even know that Lance Armstrong was dead. I thought he was still alive, but there he is, just on my head.
I didn't know he was a swordsman.
Wow.
I mean, a lot happens when you enter the ghoul dimension, you know.
You know what I'll say? Mr. P's really taking the piss, am I right? There he goes. I like his cool sunglasses, the spookiest eyewear of all,
Yeah.
which I am also wearing in the photo that we've
true.
had forever.
That's true.
It was all planned.
Well, you know what? I'm really happy to see that they all showed up because I was getting a little bit nervous there. But thankfully the party's here, and we can continue as planned.
They saw their friend in the poster, and they just had to come and join us.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, next time I'll have more skeletons to lure them in. I don't know how I'll manage that, but we'll figure it out. Anyway, what I recommended to you last week, Stephen, was the film Dead Alive, more commonly known as Braindead, technically, because it's only known as Dead Alive here in the U.S. This film was directed by Peter Jackson. It is a zombie splatter comedy. Shut up, phone. And I will let you take it from here.
Oh, that was a spooky apparition.
Yeah, scary bells.
Messaging you from the beyond. Anyway, the first thing I'll say about this film is I'm wondering who at Warner Brothers watched this and was like, this is the man we want to put in charge of our Lord of the Rings trilogy. Because what a first foray into the filmmaking genre. Even a little bit of Skull Island, which Peter Jackson will later come to be associated with, as he directed a King Kong movie as well.
Funny that you mentioned that. First of all, this was his third film. The two before this are even well, maybe not crazier, but certainly even more bizarre. And also, I'm pretty sure that in the King Kong remake they reference this film, like the rat monkey is like in a box or something in that movie somewhere in the background or something like that. So really, there's a cinematic universe going on here.
The first thing that struck me about this film is that it is bonkers, like just straight wild. And I'm not even talking about the climax of the film, which is like really where everything goes just balls to the wall crazy. Just from like pretty much the onset, the way that it's filmed, it's always filmed very B-movie style from really top to bottom. Everything about the cinematography, including the set design and the costuming, it takes place in the 50s, which is just a great setting for any kind of B-movie horror sort of feel. And you get that from the very onset, from the acting to the lines. And then it's also very comedic, which I don't think that I necessarily expected. Now I do know, like, having watched this and then after the fact, like, it is sort of supposed to be very comedic in that way, but there's just a lot of dialogue and scenes that are just straight up played for laughs, straight comedy, not even horror. The scene that comes to mind is when he's walking around his zombie baby, which is just like a whole bunch of slapstick comedy, essentially. I guess I should talk a little bit about like the premise of the film. Essentially, there's a rat monkey that they bring back from Skull Island, and it essentially creates a big zombie outbreak. And that's really the entire film. Most of the film takes place in basically like two settings. A shop where there's kind of a love interest, and there's like some spooky voodoo stuff or astrological stuff going on. And then the main character's house where he's treating his mother, who's like kind of patient zero, and then it just gets crazy from there. The house being the main setting, really, and then as it gets crazier and crazier, most of the movie takes place there. What I really enjoyed about it was just that general campiness, cheesiness. I really, really love the practical effects here. There's a ton of really cool practical effects, honestly. I mean, to today's standards, it looks kind of cheesy, campy, but I think that just elevated it. I'm sure at the time, a lot of that stuff looked that way as well, but also some of it was pretty interesting to see. And even now, I feel like some of the practical effects here are actually pretty interesting to see. Some of the stuff that they do with, like, this movie is incredibly gory, like just balls to the wall gory, a real gore fest from start to finish, pretty much. With some of the stuff they do with, like, chopping up people in blenders and all this stuff. Some of the acting there was really great. And then some of it is just, like, very intentionally campy. Like, you can tell that some of these people are just, they create, like, model casts or dolls, essentially. And it's, like, so over the top that it all kind of fits even still. Because none of this isn't necessarily like a Saw or some of the other gore porn horror movie that has come after it. Like, it's never necessarily played for seriousness. It's always kind of played for a laugh, and then the climax is just so over the top that it's all just kind of inherently humorous. But it is really incredibly gory, and a lot of it is, I wouldn't say hard to watch. I'm sure, like, if you watch this in the day, it would be. Now it's kind of, all of that's kind of elevated to a level where it's all, as I mentioned, kind of played up for camp, that none of it's necessarily hard to watch, but it is all gross from start to finish.
Yeah, well, I mean, I look at this movie basically as like a live action cartoon. Like, really, and that's the entire film. Like, the opening scene is so intentionally campy and hammy and dumb, and that's actually the entire movie's like that. And if there was any doubt as to whether or not it was intentional, you only have to watch the 2 movies that Peter Jackson directed before this, which I have also seen. I don't like either of them, but this was what he was doing back then. He was making these low budget, although this movie definitely has a higher budget than those, but like these low budget splatter, grotesque, disgusting, gross out comedies. I call it a gross out comedy, but not in the way of like popular 90s gross out comedies or 2000s gross out comedies. More just like gore effects and other disgusting effects played for the most to the most absurd degree, to the point where it's barely even gross anymore. It's kind of just so crazy, you're just kind of in awe of it. This movie does it better than the other 2, for sure. But it really is like a comedy movie at the end of the day, and it does often get the title of the goriest film ever made. And I don't know if that's true, though I certainly wouldn't be surprised. If you're talking gore as in like shock value or like something that's going to really disturb you, that's not at all what this movie is. Like, the gore effects are just ridiculous. They're funny. And as you said, a lot of them are played for laughs. A lot of them are just jokes, because they're so ridiculous, so hammy, and so campy, that there's just no way you can take it seriously. A lot of these gore effects you watch and you're like, there is no way that a human body could be manipulated in this way, or there is no way that wound would gush that much blood. But that's kind of the fun of it, is that it's just so over the top. And I think that although it definitely has, some elements of splatter and gross out throughout the entire movie, there is really like a point in this film where it just decides to open the floodgates and just go fucking bonkers. Like, you could very easily, given this movie's reputation, watch like half of it and just be like, okay, I mean, yeah, it's gross. There's some blood and there's some like gore here or there, but like, I don't get why they say this movie is, the goriest thing ever. And then there's just like a point where you're just like, oh, okay. Which is another way in which the comedy structure really works, because the movie gives you time to breathe, and to establish character, and to establish a much more lighthearted and much less bloody approach, so that when it does decide to just go nuts, it's a lot funnier, because it's just like, I can't even believe this is happening right now. And I'm sure there's like individual little gore scenes that we'll bring up, but I mean, just in general, like, there is a point where it all just comes moment after moment, and you just start to lose track of everything that's happening because there's just so much blood on the screen.
Yeah, and that is kind of the climax, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I wanted to mention maybe my favorite scene where there's like it happens in a cemetery, and they're like all trying to, they're like, these ruffians find the main character basically trying to dig up his mom, who's still essentially a zombie. And then there's a priest, and he jumps down and says, "I kick ass for the Lord." And then he starts martial arts karate chopping all the ruffian zombies. And I really enjoyed that. And also the part where the mom eats the main character's love interest dog, and she runs into the room and says, "Your mom ate my dog." And I got a good chuckle out of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mr. P also would have gotten a good chuckle out of that based on his whole persona.
You can tell he's just laughing it up right now. Look at him.
Maurice, now, I don't know about Maurice, what he would have thought of this film, but everyone else here definitely would have been a real humdinger for them.
Yeah, for sure.
So I do want to talk about the climax, because really I feel like, well, I'll just say it. I mean, I enjoyed this movie. It was a fun time. I don't know if it's one of those ones where I'd watch every Halloween, but I did enjoy just like the camp of it and all of it. But what I specifically want to focus in on is the climax, because really I feel like that's where this movie just goes off the rails. I'm almost positive what you're talking about when you talk about how this movie could have potentially gotten that title of goriest film of all time, because literally at one point the entire scene is covered in blood, and both of the main characters are covered in blood from head to toe, because essentially they have this kick-in rager at the house, and the zombies break loose, and then everybody in the house becomes a zombie, and it is just nonstop. From that point on to the end of the movie, there is not a single second where you can breathe, because somebody is chopping up something, or somebody's eating somebody, or something's happening. The baby is on the loose, who is my favorite character, by the way. I love this zombie baby that is birthed because two of the zombies had sex, I guess.
On the dinner table, yeah.
On the dinner table. That happens again, by the way. We haven't mentioned this yet, but the version that I watched was like a complete unedited version, and there were some additional scenes, which really, none of them necessarily brought up anything new, but those additional scenes, one of them is those two zombies have sex again on the floor for some reason. Anyway,
that was cut for. I watched there's an American unrated version that you'll probably find now if you look at like any new DVD or whatever. And it's like a couple minutes shorter. They did cut the second zombie sex scene. Seems a little bit gratuitous, but yeah.
But anyway, at that point in the movie, that's really where I feel like this film does, as you said, kind of become just this live action cartoon, because it is just nonstop. Somebody's being chopped up or put into a blender, or their head is being smashed in by a light bulb, or something is happening at literally every second where you have no time to even think. And then it all culminates in this giant monster fight, which is super fun to watch. Well, I really enjoy all of the cinematography here. I think from start to finish, it's just, it is wild to me, like having just watching all of that play out, like how many takes most of that must have took, and that there's just nonstop action and getting people together for all of that, and the blood and everything that is being sprayed everywhere, like having to contain all of that, and the explosions and the fire and everything is just really something to marvel at, honestly. And as I mentioned, it's all played for laughs, so that on top of it is just the extra level of super camp that's happening from start to finish is just so much fun to watch.
Well, and I think it's not just that the effects are really good, because the effects are fantastic, at least in this section of the movie. I think there's a lot of really shitty effects during the first half, like they kind of blew the budget on this climax here, but it really is, like, the gore effects are great, the practical effects are great, and it's, decently convincing as far as practical gore effects go. I mean, aside from the obviously ridiculous scenarios that they're placed in, the actual appearance of it looks quite good. And what I find most impressive about this bit, as I was watching this again, was really just that, like, it's not even just that the effects are good; it's that they're so consistently creative. It reminds me a lot of The Thing, the 1980s The Thing, which is definitely much scarier. It's not supposed to be funny or anything like that. But that film's gore effects are like, super, super inventive and strange and creative. Every single time they come up with something, it's always something new and interesting and weird that you don't really feel like you've seen before. This movie's like that in like every single death, like or not every single one, but anyone that the camera lingers on for any period of time, it's always something that you're just like kind of blown away by the creativity of it. There's a lot of very silly things like the zombie baby ripping apart a woman's head from the inside. I don't know how it got in her head. Who knows? It sticks its hands through the side of her head, then rips her face open, and its face becomes her face. And then, as the baby is in her head, she gets back up and starts walking around like a zombie. Which is just like insane. There's the light bulb thing where they like throw a zombie against a light bulb and her head lights up like it's a light bulb. There's a guy whose head gets chopped off and then gets replaced with a garden gnome. I mean, that's just like a little bit of it. There's so much ridiculous stuff that happens. A half of a guy's head that's like still alive. Because that's another thing about this movie. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say quickly, that's the one that impressed me the most. Like watching that half human head behave so human like I don't even know how they really utilize that effect. And then also basically at one point that head, that just half of a head, ends up in a blender and they chop it up and it's like so real. And it's not just that. I mean, you mentioned some other ones too, but that was the one that really took me.
It's also just like this movie has a very silly approach to zombies in that if you chop off body parts, those body parts then become zombified. There's actually a group of living intestines that's one of the zombies in this movie that like grabs onto people. And the other one I wanted to point out, there's so much stuff, I can't even get to all of it, but the other one I wanted to point out is one of the ruffian zombies, who's one of like the 6 or 7 original zombies that the main character Lionel tries to hide away in his house. By the end of his zombie life, he is a torso with a head and arms, but no legs, and he's holding 2 legs, which are both all bone except for the feet, and he's holding them with his hands and using them as stilts to walk around. I mean, it's just bonkers. There's so much more than that, too. And I just think that that's almost what makes it even more impressive, because it's one thing to just, shower the screen in blood, which this movie does, but it's another thing for all of these gore effects to actually be fun and interesting and consistently new, especially since there's so much happening. It manages to not get boring, because it's always just like, I can't believe I'm looking at that. I can't believe I'm looking at that, over and over again, until, of course, you get the famous or infamous, I guess, lawnmower scene where it is just absolute chaos. Just arms flying all over the screen, blood flying all over the screen, people spinning on the lawnmower blade. It's just insane. But yeah.
One criticism I did have was I feel like some of the scenes, and I will preface this by saying that this could very well be because I watched probably the most unedited version that there is. Some of the scenes I feel like did overstay their welcome. And one of the scenes that I wanted to specifically mention was the scene that you just mentioned, which is the scene where he has the lawnmower and he's chopping up all the zombies. I felt like that was just one of the couple of scenes that I felt like went on a little too long. And maybe it's because I'm a millennial and I want it now, and I don't want to have to wait and watch. My attention span is too short because of iPhone screens. But essentially, like, he goes through the wave of zombies. He goes back through the wave of zombies. He goes back through the wave of zombies again. He goes back through again. And then it culminates in like a final showdown, which is actually pretty good. But that was just like a little microcosm of some of the scenes that I felt like just overstayed their welcome a little bit too much. Like at some point it's like, okay, I love the camp. I love the gore. I understand what's happening here. And as you mentioned, it's like limbs flying everywhere, blood going everywhere. And that's great. But I feel like some of those scenes just dragged on a little too much for me.
Yeah, that might have been a result of your edit, because in the most commonly viewed in the US 97-minute unrated cut, that lawnmower bit is the only scene that drags that way, which I always thought was great because that became the joke. It was like the movie had already had so much gore up to that point, and then this is the scene where it all culminates in the biggest bloodbath, and it just keeps going and going and going. And I imagine that, I know Peter Jackson has said that 97-minute cut is his preferred cut, so I imagine it's probably, it probably is a result of the one that you watched. I imagine there are probably other scenes that went on longer than they do in that cut, just to show some extra gore or something, to the point where the lawnmower scene no longer really stands out. But at least in the cut that I'm familiar with, I think that's kind of what makes that bit so funny. Oh, but I will say, if I have criticism of this movie, and I do, I think this movie is perfect once you get into the party bloodbath and all of that, and of course the graveyard scene with the priest. I mean, there's so many incredible moments in this movie that are just hilarious. I think the first third or so of this movie, though, really isn't that good. A lot of the campy acting and weird close-up shots, which I know Peter Jackson is famously fond of, even in Lord of the Rings and such, but in this movie it's a little awkward. And the especially low-budget appearance of that bit of the movie, where the effects are a lot weaker. There are a lot of scenes during this bit of the film that just aren't very good, that aren't very funny. And this is also where some of the gross-out humor is just gross and not funny. Like there's a pudding scene, which I am not a fan of. And it reminds me of stuff that was in his previous two movies, Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles, where it's just like, okay, this is nasty, I get it, but this is just nasty. So, I mean, I feel like it's one of those movies where you kind of just have to stick with it, because once it hits a certain point, it's just incredible after that. But before then, I don't know. There's a lot in here that I don't think is really all that great.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And then I would also add on some of the back and forth with his love interest of the film. I feel like some of that is played up a little too much. It all kind of fits into that 50s, campy aesthetic. But some of it is just, I don't feel like it really adds anything to what I feel like is the best component of this movie. It does give some sort of credence to and some weight to the final scenes of the film, which I think is 100% an addition, like a really great addition. But I think that some of that is, in that first third especially, just that back and forth, it just didn't really add anything. In fact, I felt like in some of those scenes it almost detracted from what I felt like was really the driving force of the film. So that would be the other thing that I would add.
Okay, well, do we want to wrap it up from here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, you go first.
I enjoyed this film. I think it was a fun, campy ride. As you've already mentioned, once it gets to the climax, it's just an incredibly fun thing to watch. And while I definitely do feel like it is in the genre of horror, 100% this is more of a comedy than anything. As you mentioned, there is some gross out humor, and a lot of that gore is way, way over the top. So if that stuff turns you off, then this is definitely not the film for you. Do I think it's the goriest film of all time? I could definitely see that being the case, but it's not necessarily that same type of realistic gore porn that has come after it. Things like Saw and some other films. They're not coming to mind, but
Hostel.
Yeah, Hostel, those sorts of films. It's not necessarily that, but if that stuff turns you off, this is still definitely not the film for you. With all that being said, as I mentioned, I did have some scenes, and there is a portion of this movie that I feel like kind of weighs itself down and isn't necessarily funny. And because of that, I think I give this maybe a 7 or an 8. It's interesting to see from a perspective of knowing what Peter Jackson has gone on to do with these gigantic budget movies, just astronomically gigantic budget movies. To kind of come back to this, it's really fun, and then see some of those similar trappings that he's taken forward into some of those other films. So with that, I give it probably somewhere in a 7 or an 8. And I recommend it cautiously, I guess.
All right, yeah, and I definitely I think this is a great movie to show people so that you can say, like, Peter Jackson made this, because everybody knows who he is now, you know. And funny enough, I've never seen Lord of the Rings. Maybe one day I will, but I've never gotten myself to actually watch those movies. And yet I have seen the first 3 movies he did. So I've seen this trilogy, which people sometimes call the trash trilogy. Which, if you've only seen this one, maybe that name doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you've seen the other 2, it definitely makes sense. And I enjoy watching these, even though the first 2 ones I don't even like. But I enjoy watching these because his sense of just low budget, like, schlock is pretty amazing. And this movie takes that feel but amps it up with a bigger budget and way better effects and just a much better filmmaking in general. So this is really the culmination. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, it's a really funny movie. I think that this movie would be really one of my favorite movies if it were essentially, like, only the last half of it. But of course, you know, you couldn't do that. You'd miss all the character development and whatever. But yeah, as I said, I feel like it takes a while to get to that point. But once you get there, if you like gore effects at all, and sillier ones, you know, yeah, not like Saw or Hostel, like where you're supposed to be disturbed. You're just supposed to watch and be like, holy shit, that's insane. Then this is the pinnacle. This is the pinnacle of that, because it's not disturbing, but it is excessively gory. That being said, you know, as Steven pointed out, I think if you're grossed out by gore effects at all, even though this movie is really silly, should be obvious you probably don't want to watch it. So that's how my recommendation goes. If you like that stuff at all, you're going to have a blast. And if you don't, obviously don't watch it. I would give it an 8 overall, because I think that the second half is so amazing. And I don't think, like, I should say second one is 2/3, I guess. And I don't think the first third is terribly bad or anything, but it is weighed down a little bit. And yeah, that's I think that's all I have to say about that. So should we move on to what you recommended to me, Steven?
Yes.
All right.
So, Dawn, last time I recommended to you Five Nights at Freddy's, which was a game that came out, I think, in 2014, although it might have been kind of in a pre-release phase before that. But essentially, Five Nights at Freddy's is a hark back to the old point-and-click horror games. This might be the most pointy and clickiest of them all, and probably with the least amount of actual story or character development. Essentially, you play the role of a security guard at what's a fictional Chuck E. Cheese, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and your really only goal is to just kind of watch security cameras and make sure that creepy animatronics don't jump scare you. It was really the game that I think launched 1,000 YouTube careers, because Let's Players really, honestly, I feel like made this game what it is today. It has gone on to create many, many sequels, and is still creating sequels. Essentially, Let's Players just kind of reacted to the screams, and children loved it, and now it's a gigantic force in the gaming world, and it was made with an incredibly small budget. So with that, I will turn it over to you to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's what I want to start with, is just the fact that, I mean, like, this game is huge. This series is huge, I guess I should say. And I don't know which one got the best sales or which one most people have played, but I mean, everybody knows about what these games are, I think, at this point, or at least if you're online, you do. It is one of the most viral gaming series ever.
Yeah, probably up there with, I would say, like, Minecraft was in this same time frame as well, and had that same kind of viral sensation, viral hit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it comes off the legs of other games. Like, or I should say it follows in the footsteps. I don't think it comes off the legs of his expression, but it's scary. So
well, it is when it's spooky.
Yeah, true. It follows in the footsteps of other games, most notably Slender, which came before this, which is different, but only really in style. Like, the general idea, which is play until you get jump scared, is the same. Also, in the sense that once you do get jump scared, you have to restart all over again. So it's like, that's your punishment for losing. That's your losing screen. That's it. Other games might do a jump scare like just as a jump scare, or maybe there are some where like when you die you get a jump scare. But these games, you jump scare, it's over, and that's how it works. And really, this game got popular for the same reason that Slender did. Although this game has proved to be much more potent and much more of a mainstay, and I will get into why I think that is. But first, I just want to say, I think the reason that these games took off at all is exactly what you said. They're like Let's Player bait, Not even really Let's Player. I mean, really, gameplay footage of this game is much more like a reaction video than it is like a Let's Play. Because I remember when this game dropped and when every single like gaming YouTuber, particularly the ones who were famous for screaming into their webcams, they all did videos playing this game because it's so perfect. It's short. On your first or couple playthroughs, you're not going to know how to get through the whole game, so you're bound to get that good jump scare. And once you get that good jump scare, you can scream and end the video, and it usually takes you about 10 minutes to get there, so it is perfect. All that we've talked about Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which I think really jump-started the careers of so many of these horror YouTubers, but that game wasn't nearly as perfect for this formula, because that game you had to play through for an extended period of time. You had to immerse yourself in it. And there weren't really that many moments where you could just scream and then cut the video. You just couldn't really do that. But with this and Slender, it's like that's what they're designed for. And so I think really that's what made this game take off more than anything, is that if you look at it as a vessel for reaction content, it is like almost factory manufactured for that kind of thing. Which, I mean, I've seen a couple horror games prop up since here that have been popular, and a lot of them definitely go for a similar thing, but I don't know that I've ever seen it quite as perfectly formulated as Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it, because what's so interesting about this game, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, is it's like, I'll be honest, it's not a very fun game to play. Like, truly, the gameplay itself is very, very minimal. You're really not doing much. You're really just kind of waiting to get jump scared, or if you're good, not get jump scared, I guess. But something about the way that it just so perfectly lends itself to Let's Play series, it's like, it's almost interesting in the fact that I feel like with the onset and the kind of mainstream quality that Let's Players have taken on, I mean, some of them even feature on like Netflix and streaming services now, which is kind of wild. But it really launched a whole genre of game, which is like, and as you mentioned, I mean, it's standing on the shoulders of some of the giants that have fallen by the wayside at this point, but essentially like this genre of game that's just like a Let's Play game, because you really experience this game, I feel like, best through watching someone else play it, because you playing it yourself, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people, and the series is gigantic, so there are absolutely plenty of people who play these games, and most of them are 6-year-olds on their iPad, but
which it is on Apple products.
But it's like, it really is an interesting one to look back at, because it's like, this is such a different, it's like a multimedia experience, honestly. And I guarantee that the creator of this game, Scott Cawthon, I think is his name.
Cawthon or Cawthorn, I don't know.
Yeah, I guarantee that he did not intend that to be the case, but it just happened to become the case. And now the series is everywhere. I mean, these characters are everywhere. And I will give the actual game credit. I mean, these characters are very recognizable. They're kind of bad in that like free Unity asset look, but that just kind of increases the campiness and the style and the whole aesthetic. I mean, they look bad. They don't look good, but that is even creepier. So And the characters are very recognizable. I mean, on the screen right now we have Freddy Fazbear, who's kind of the main character, but there are many other characters that have become popular. Like there's like a chicken or something.
Chica.
Yeah, Chica, and
Yeah.
there's like a fox, and there's golden versions of the characters. And as you play more in through the series, you can unlock new characters and all this stuff. And all that is like just accelerates that watchability of the game because these characters are so recognizable.
Yeah, there's definitely more to talk about with this game's YouTubeification, if you want to say, and I do want to get into it, but I'd like to take a break to actually talk about the game itself a little bit, because there really is not actually that much to say, surprisingly. So first of all, what is the game about? You know, as you mentioned, you're like in this Chuck E. Cheese, but it's not Chuck E. Cheese, and at night you have to have guards who watch over the animatronics, and the reason that they need this is because the animatronics are like haunted or, well, they're alive. There's a whole bunch of lore, I'm sure. But in this game, you don't know much. You just know that they're alive, and if they see somebody after dark, they will interpret them as being an animatronic without its suit on. So they will try to shove you inside of them, which is... it's a premise, and I will say that in comparison to Slender, which again, I really do think this game takes its entire inspiration from Slender, and I don't like that game either, so I guess it's fitting. But much like Slender, or sorry, unlike Slender, I do think that the premise here is definitely a little bit more interesting. You know, Slender is just based on a creepypasta, and really all it was you clicked on papers and walked around until Slender jump-scared you. There wasn't really much to it, and you know, this game sets up some sort of backstory or some sort of motivation for you, and it is genuinely pretty creative. I mean, I actually think this setting is a great idea for a horror game. You know, a night guard like at a dark Chuck E. Cheese-esque place with creepy aging animatronics that are all alive. Like, that's genius. And I don't know of any other horror game that did that. If there is one, I would love to play it because I really do like that premise a lot, and I think that creepy animatronics in general is like an underused element in horror that we could really get more out of. So I genuinely like all of that. It's just that I feel like this game didn't have the budget or even the drive to do anything more than that, because that's really all it is. You know, like the actual gameplay involves watching cameras, which is definitely different. It's a little creative, but that's all. That's it. You look at cameras and you press door buttons to make sure they can't get to you. That's it. You can't even move. You can just turn the camera a tiny bit and look at either door. That is the entire gameplay. That's all it is. And you know, while simple gameplay isn't a bad thing, this game just turns into watching stuff, and that's it. Like, I'm always left wishing and thinking about what this game could have been if you could walk around. Like, maybe you could walk around with the camera on hand, so you always know, like, okay, I'm walking around, they're near me, oh god, and you have to, like, escape them or something like that. I understand why it might not work because it is a really small environment, but it would at least be something. Like, what I really like in a horror game is the feeling that you're, you know, being chased by something and you're trying to get away from something that you can't do anything about. That's scary. But this game, like, yeah, you're being chased, but you're also not moving. You know, you're just waiting for them to show up. And then once they do show up, and once you do get jump scared, even if you did find it scary the first 1 or 2 times, it will never be scary again. Because the game is just not creative about how it does this. I mean, for one thing, jump scares in and of themselves are definitely a very fine line to walk between being cheap or being effective, and I don't have anything against them in concept, but when all your jump scare is the end to the game, and it happens the same way every single time, which is that you can't close the door, you look at your camera, you put your camera down, and then, oh my god, he's in your face, and it goes, ah! It happens that way every single time, so, you know, once you know that, which, again, you'll find out by playing, like, 1 or 2 playthroughs, then every single time the door won't shut, you're like, okay, gotta open the camera and close it, and then lose. It's just not scary anymore. That tension's completely gone, and I just feel like it's a twofold issue, because 1, the gameplay isn't fun at all, and 2, the scares just aren't scary after like, you know, 1 game of it, or 1, like, watching somebody else play it. Then you already know.
Hold up, I need to take a quick pause. I 100% agree. I think that the biggest issue that I have with the game is the gameplay, because there really is none. And it's hard to justify multiple playthroughs. The reason why I feel like being a reaction streamer lends itself so well is because people can react with you. But when you're playing by yourself, it's like, as you mentioned, you hit a jump scare, hit a couple jump scares. Even if you win, I mean, when you play again, there's really nothing going on. And a game that's short like this should have that replayability, because if it's not a story-driven experience, if the experience is the gameplay, if there's no change to that gameplay, if the gameplay is so static, then there's no reason to bring you back. So I'll let you talk about that. I take a quick pause. I'll be right back.
Okay, just say something when you get back, so I know. Anyway, okay. Well, it's the Dawn show, but anyway, yeah, it really is just one of those. It's a game that I never quite fully understood. Well, I understand looking back as to what the phenomenon was, but as to why everybody wanted to play it, I mean, like, yeah, you know, you can show it to your friend who doesn't know about it, which you can't do anymore because everybody knows about it now. But you can show it to your friend, watch your friends scream, and then bam, you got it, you know? But nobody's going to be able to get a lot of replay value out of this game. Nobody's going to be able to play it a lot because it's kind of one and done. So, okay, you've experienced what scares the game has to offer, which are really minimal. Now you just have to figure out how to beat it, and once you beat it, you're done, you know? And, you know, to be fair to it, it is a very cheap game, but I just don't feel like it's unreasonable for me to say, like, okay, maybe there could have been more, especially considering that this concept, again, is genuinely really, really good. And even the idea of watching cameras is a genuinely really good concept. It's just that that's all they have to offer. That's it. And what's amazing is that I stopped following these games because I didn't even like Five Nights at Freddy's when it came out, so I didn't really care too much. The only other game I saw gameplay of was the second one, which was kind of just the same thing, but with more shit to worry about. And if anything, watching gameplay of that game now, it really just looks like you end up just repeating the same actions over and over again. It just becomes like this muscle memory cycle you have to do. At least this game was simple enough so that if the gameplay felt a little bit more fluid than that. But from what I've seen of 2, it's kind of just like, okay, check on this, click this, wind that up, and then over and over again, just repeat until you win. And I don't know. I never watched the 3rd. I never watched the 4th or whatever else. There's more games than that. I don't even remember. There's FNAF World or whatever the hell. But I've never watched them, so I'm not sure if they continued in that direction. But I don't think any of them ever really shied away from this watching cameras, closing doors concept. Which is just kind of amazing. I don't know. I just feel like, you know, this game's cheap. This game maybe has an excuse. But, like, you're not going to expand on this concept at all? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm back. I just wanted to say, like, I want to mention, because I think you just talked about it, like, what's weird about this series is that then it spun off, and I feel like it's a fever dream. It, like, spun off into, like, a platformer at some point, and, like, an RPG, and it just got really wild. Now, I will say, what's interesting about this series, and it kind of is ahead of its time in this way, but it does lend itself so well to an augmented reality or a virtual reality experience. And I think they have come out with a virtual reality version, because this idea of watching cameras and waiting for a jump scare and those sorts of things, and because you are static, because you don't move, VR is like a perfect transition, or this game is a perfect transition to VR, because that's exactly kind of what you might want from a VR horror experience. Now, there are definitely VR horror experiences where you do move, but just in general, like, locomotion in VR is just such a weird thing right now that people are still trying to figure out. So it is like a really interesting thing, because it's like the gameplay is so simple, and as we talked about, you know, not that great, but for VR, it's actually kind of a perfect little thing.
Maybe so. It was a little bit early to that, though, wasn't it? Yeah. So anyway, that's really all I have to say about the game itself, because there isn't that much to say. Oh yeah, and also it looks terrible. It just looks terrible. I can't even really get behind the idea that they look bad in a good way. I don't find these animatronics particularly creepy. I mean, they're creepier than maybe Chuck E. Cheese. But yeah, they're just not really they just look terrible. The game just looks really bad. And I remember looking at Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and it looks the same way. So I don't know if this even got updated at all throughout
Even the
these
newest
games.
one.
Really, it looks the same. Nice.
And what's crazy, and now I will contend that, as I mentioned at the top, like that kind of adds to the cheesiness. But I feel like the other thing that this game launched was 1,000 Unity asset Steam games, because really that's what this game is. I mean, now it's not just straight Unity rips; like they actually did do modeling work on these characters, but so many people tried to tailor off the success of Five Nights at Freddy's, because if you look at it compared to some of those like just Steam like FPS Unity asset rips, I don't know if you could say like this looks any better than those, and the gameplay is just as basic. But Five Nights at Freddy's just came out at that perfect time where Let's Players were able to attach to it, and it became this gigantic force in gaming, which is still crazy to me. And it hasn't really evolved since, and I don't know, that just is a weird thing that happened, honestly.
The last thing I want to say about this game is the story element, because something that is kind of interesting, I guess, about this game as a phenomenon is the fact that its story and lore got expanded upon and basically created by like theory channels on YouTube, namely, of course, Game Theory, which milked the hell out of this game in this series. Because in the first game, there are these little subtle hints at stuff, and there are mentions of events that took place, such as the infamous Bite of 87, that the game doesn't explain, but it has like Easter eggs around that like are kind of cryptic, and people like looked into them so much and came up with this whole story. And Scott Cawthon in later games, to my understanding, added these little sequences that expanded upon those story elements in ways that were very much in line with things that theorists had come up with. And I happen to speculate, and I'm probably right, that really the story was made by these theorists. They took the little bits and pieces that were left by Scott in this first game and made a story out of it that was way bigger than he probably even came up with, and then he was like, okay, yeah, you were right, and then he just went with it. I really don't think that people just got all this stuff right. I think they just came up with it for him, which is kind of cool, maybe, but in a way it only kind of works to this game's detriment again, because it's like, okay, well, you know, you have these really, really vague story elements that, sure, like, you can come up with more in your head, but there's such little motivation playing this game. There's just such little to it, that even something as simple as the story, because if you're going to have a game with minimal gameplay, you'd at least hope, okay, maybe there's some story elements or something. Even that, you're just left to scrounge up little ideas and make it up in your head. Not a concept I hate necessarily, but again, when it's not coupled with great gameplay or anything, what's the point? But I guess it is another way, and this is something I was hinting at talking about earlier, it is another way in which this game managed to be such a phenomenon, because, you know, not only can you watch your favorite Let's Player scream at it, you know, but you can also watch, like, your favorite theory channels make these big videos and theories about it, and then, of course, you get fan fictions from that, and fan art, and so much stuff, because there's so much left to the fan community to come up with. And again, I like that to a certain degree, or at least in certain situations. Like, I don't need all the lore told to my face. It's great if you can, you know, leave it just open enough that you get this huge fan community that comes up with it all for you. That's kind of cool. It's just like, there is absolutely nothing to it in this first game, and it just makes the game feel even more empty. Like, it's just a vessel for fan fictions and Let's Plays, which is really what I think this game is at the end of the day.
Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. That was basically my final thoughts. Yeah, minimal gameplay, not fun, really boring, not scary, looks terrible, and everything you know about this game, or at least almost everything you know about this game, came from other people thinking about it and talking about it, more than it did the game itself. You know, it's cool that it was such a phenomenon, and I know that there are people who definitely really like this series, and I guess I can see why. I mean, the premise is cool, like I said, but that's really, for me, that's really all I got. The premise is cool, and the idea of looking at cameras in a horror game is a good idea. You know, that's all I can say. I didn't think a lot about what my score was going to be, but God, like when I really think about it, I really don't like this game at all. I mean, I'm going to give it a 3, and I'm going to say that's generous because I just really don't like playing it. And I don't know of many people who do. I think most people just like showing it to people, you know, and watching other people play and telling other people about it, and then watching them play for their first time or something like that. And maybe like, you know, doing your first full playthrough and winning, and that's all you get. And do I recommend Five Nights at Freddy's? Definitely not. No. Especially not now. You know, it's turned into so much, and I think it's probably one of those things at this point where you kind of had to have been there to even get any enjoyment out of it. I feel like going back to this now, it only has aged worse. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I think it's just such a non-thing. Like, it's so unfun to play. And I feel like it came out at a time when everyone was ripping on walking simulators and those sorts of things. But this is like even less than doing that, truly. It's really just sitting there and waiting for the jump scare. Now, all the stuff surrounding it, I think, is kind of interesting, and its effect on gaming is interesting to look at. But, you know, as a game itself, I don't recommend it at all. I don't really think it's fun. I don't see why you would want to play it. It's not good to look at. Just everything that you said is 100% true. And if you want a point-and-click horror game, there are so many better point-and-click horror games. But as like a medium for Let's Players and all that, it was just such a phenomenal success. And I think it's asking price too. It was always sort of cheap, so that definitely helped. But I really give it like a 1, honestly. Like, I don't even think it's worth going back to, worth playing. I don't know if any of the games in the series I would say are worth going back to, worth playing, because it's such just a non-thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I was too generous with the 3. I'll go with the 2, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like yeah, because I mean, we obviously agree completely. I guess I just feel like as far as like a bottom of the barrel Steam game goes, this is definitely better than a lot of stuff. Like, there's definitely games that took after this that are like worse, you know, that are like even more bottom of the barrel. Like, at least this game went through the effort of creating some kind of world and some kind of atmosphere, and it does do that. But yeah, it just sucks to play. I don't know.
Okay, so should we move on to our recommendations?
I think we should, and I will go first. I have to get rid of all these skeletons. We have to say goodbye. Mr. P,
bye.
I love you. See you around, buddy. Lance, you've kept us safe. Big props.
Bye, friends.
Big props. Mallory's, I don't really know what to think about Mallory's, to be honest with you. But Gary, excellent.
Yeah, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know why we keep inviting him.
Yeah, I actually don't. He just kind of sneaks his way in. He's a weird guy. Gary throws that great curveball. So, you know, shout out.
What a phenomenal curve. Truly, I mean.
Billy has a cool dance. I like Billy, so I'll see you around.
Sign that guy.
Lindsay, expert violinist. Truly. She was serenading my right ear. One of my ears. I love you. And Ashley and Zoe, you know, best friends forever. So
keep on dancing.
All right. So anyway, for next time, Steven, I am recommending the game Super Meat Boy. Super Meat Boy is a 2010 platformer game that I believe first appeared on Xbox Live Arcade back in the Xbox 360, and since then is on every platform imaginable. It is, side-scrolling platformer, and it is a sequel to an old Newgrounds Flash game called Meat Boy, which was like a similar, almost like a proof of concept of Super Meat Boy as a game. So that is what we will talk about next time.
And I also have a game as a recommendation. I figured might as well round out the trifecta, because this will be the third week where I've given a game, but we also explore albums and movies a lot, so it's nice to kind of talk about something else for a little bit. And then maybe, who knows what I'll recommend next time. You can never know with me. I'm an enigma. So what I'm recommending to you is Rocket League. Rocket League is a 2015 game that came out on PC and was originally made available free on PS4 as a PSN PS Plus exclusive. If you were a PS Plus survivor, ooh, spooky. You were a PS4 PS Plus subscriber, you were able to get Rocket League for free, which is one of the many reasons why it became such a success. I think that that'll be something interesting to talk about, but generally we'll talk about the game and its merits. Rocket League has gone on to survive for a very long time as a esport, a very popular esport and a very popular game, still has a large player base. And that player base was just made larger because the game officially went free to play this year through what I'm assuming is an Epic exclusivity deal. So now it's exclusively on Epic. You can no longer play it on Steam. You can still play it on other platforms, and it is one of the first games that went cross-platform. So next time we will talk about 2015's Rocket League.
Well, all right, I have to drag this card up here. That was our spooky podcast, and, I would be tempted to take off the blood from the screen right now and return us to our calm state, but it's not Halloween yet, The spooks aren't ending, so I can't do that. You're getting no resolution tonight.
We cannot escape this mortal coil.
Well, really, ever. But
never.
Certainly not for the rest of October. Thanks as always for watching or listening if you are listening on Castbox. And if you are, I apologize that you couldn't see our skeleton friends. Hop over to casting_404 on YouTube or just search Get Recc'd and you'll find this podcast in visual form. Really, these Halloween episodes are the only ones you need to catch in visual form. But if you're listening, thank you. And of course, with that comes with the implicit suggestion to everyone on YouTube that you should check us out on Castbox, where you can download our podcast and listen to us even offline for free, and stream us. I think you can download. I don't have the app. Shout out to Castbox. But anyway, but yeah. So thanks for watching or listening as always. Steven, do you have anything to say?
Boo.